So, hi everyone, welcome to this last session about error correction and fault tolerance. So our first talk will be Concatenate Codes Save Qubit by Satoshi Yoshida.
Thank you for the introduction. So I'm Satoshi Yoshida, coming from the University of Tokyo. And today I will talk about our recent work about the fault-tolerant quantum computation, and especially using the concatenated code to reduce the space overhead. So this is a joint work with Shiro Tamiya and Hayata Yamasaki. And the full paper of this work is on archive here. So you can check this paper if you're interested in. Okay, so let me begin with the introduction of what is the fault-tolerant quantum computation. So the aim of the fault-tolerant quantum computation is to reduce the physical error, occurring during the quantum computation. So if you have so the task of the FTQC is like this. So given a precision epsilon and given an original circuit, the task is to perform the noisy circuit to simulate the probability distribution of the original circuit within the given precision epsilon. Sorry. Okay. And to this end, we can use a quantum error correction code to suppress the logical error rate arbitrarily. And the threshold theorem guarantees that if the physical error rate is below a certain value called a threshold, then we can suppress the logical error rate to an arbitrarily small number. And by suppressing the logical error rate below the epsilon divided by the circuit size, we can achieve the task of the FTQC, because the obtained probability distribution will be epsilon close to the original circuit. And in this kind of FTQC, we have basically two overhead. We need to pay some cost to implement this FTQC. One is the space overhead, which is defined by an increase of the number of physical qubits. And the other is called the time overhead, which is defined by the increase of the depth of the circuit. Okay. And conventionally, there are two conventional approaches to implement the FTQCs. One is based on the quantum LDPC code. And a typical example of quantum LDPC code is a surface code. So this is defined like this surface patch. And we can suppress the logical error rate by increasing the distance, which is basically given by the patch size. So like this describes the distance. And by increasing the distance, we can suppress error like this. And another approach is based on the concatenated code. And most a famous example is a concatenated 7-qubit code. And in this concatenated code, we can basically concatenate each code like so. In the first one, we concatenate we encode this code with the 7-qubit, and then another level like we concatenate each this qubit in this 7-qubit code. And in this approach, we can suppress the logical error rate by increasing the concatenation level, like this. But these two conventional approaches both have some obstacle in rearranging the FTQC, which is basically on the overhead problem. So if you calculate the space overhead or the time overhead of these approaches, then it is given by this kind of polylog, polylog with respect to the circuit size. And what is the problem is that since it grows polylog logarithmically, like if we consider large-scale quantum computation, this overhead goes to infinity. So this is the problem when we are arranging the FTQC. Okay. And to circumvent this kind of overhead problem, researchers have considered a constant overhead FTQC protocols based on two approaches. And one approach is based on the quantum LDPC code. And in 2014, Gottesman has shown that if you have a quantum LDPC code having a good code parameter, like having a non-vanishing code rate, and if this distance grows polynomially with respect to the circuit code size, then we can construct a constant space overhead fault-tolerant protocol. So we can achieve this one to be constant. But the problem of this approach was that it needed a large time overhead. So like if you calculate the time overhead, then it goes polynomially, which is worse than the conventional protocol. But recently, this time overhead was improved to the polylogarithmic factor by this Tamiya Yamasaki Kwashi paper, which was presented by AQIS in the 2 weeks ago. Okay. And another approach is based on the concatenated quantum Hamming code. And basically, this is based on the concatenated code. And what is good is that it achieves the constant space overhead, and also it also have a short time overhead. And let me describe the second approach. So the concatenated quantum Hamming code is a generalization of the concatenated 7-qubit code. So instead of considering this 7-qubit code, we consider the code family called the quantum Hamming code. And this quantum Hamming code is defined for a code parameter R. And if you increase the code parameter R, it will encode many logical qubits in one code size. So if you calculate the physical qubits per logical qubit, this will approach to 1. So by concatenating this quantum Hamming code, we can obtain the constant space overhead as follows. So so first of all, for the concatenated 7-qubit code, if you calculate the number of physical qubits per logical qubit, if you increase the concatenation level, it increases exponentially because of, of course, like in each concatenation, you need to multiply 7, so it will exponentially grow. But in this concatenated Hamming code, since this code rate goes to 1 in the infinite range, this space overhead stays in a constant. So in this way, by concatenating quantum Hamming code at the growing rate, we can construct a non-vanishing overall rate. So, but to implement this kind of idea of FTQC in a realistic systems, we need to consider practical requirements for FTQCs. And of course, first of all, we need to reduce a space overhead required to FTQC because in general, like a number of qubits you can use in the experiment is limited. And also, you also need to have a high threshold code because physical error rate is also limited. And we also need to consider about the modularity, how to compose a quantum code, or of course, you also need to have some kind of quantitative comparison with many codes to get what is good or what is bad. Okay, but previous work has asked some of the point of these requirements, and basically this work solves these problems by suggesting a high threshold and a low space overhead protocol. And we also have a quantitative comparison with the surface code, and we show that we can reduce the space overhead at a practical regime. Okay. So this is the outline of this talk. First, I will talk about some background of this talk, and then I will show the main result of this talk, and then discussions. Okay. So let me compare the quantum Hamming code with the conventional protocol called the surface code first. The good point of the concatenated Hamming code is that it will achieve a constant space overhead, while surface code requires large space overhead. But kind of trade-off is that this concatenated Hamming code have a very low threshold. And from our numerical analysis, we show that this threshold is given by the order of 10 to the minus 5, which is impossible in practice. So to improve the threshold, we consider the following code construction. So on the bottom of this concatenated Hamming code, we put another quantum code, which is called underlying code. And for instance, for physical error rate, say 0.1%, we can suppress error by using the following strategy. So first, we use this underlying code to suppress error 0.1% to the 10 to the minus 5. And after suppressing the logical error rate, we can use the concatenated Hamming code. So we can suppress this logical error rate more. So by using this idea, we put high threshold code on the bottom layer to improve the threshold. Okay. And as a high threshold code, we use a C4C6 code, which is defined as a concatenation of this 422 code with a 622 code, and which is originally proposed by this newspaper, very old paper. And the merit of this code is that it will achieve a very high threshold, which is given by like a 2.4%. While in our analysis, in the same setting, we also evaluate the threshold for the surface code, which is given by 0.3%. So which is very, very better than the surface code. And the reason why it achieves a high threshold is that on the parallelizability on its encoding circuit, So these are the encoding circuits for the 422 code and the 622 code. And as you see from this efficient circuit construction, okay, so it is very efficient and implementable. So it will achieve. So it only has very small error allocations to be happen. So it will achieve very nice threshold. Okay, so this was the background of this work, and we will show the main results of this work in the next slide. So in our work, we constructed the quantum code by following this guiding principle. So we consider concatenated code, and on the underlying code, we put the high threshold code, and on the higher level code, we put the code with fewer qubits. And of course, this threshold and the space overhead are in the relation of the trade-off. So we need to somehow optimize to have a balancing between these two factors. So after optimization, we obtain the following code construction. So on the underlying code, we put the C4C6 code, which achieves the high threshold, but which may contain many qubits. On the higher level code, we put the concatenated quantum Hamming code, which achieve a very small space overhead. So this is the whole structure of our construction. So up to level 4, we use the C4C6 code, and on the higher level, we use the quantum Hamming code like this. And we show the performance comparison of our protocol with the surface code. So we first compare the space overhead of our protocol at the physical error rate to be 0.1%, which is kind of natural setting. And we show, so this graph shows a space overhead for surface code, which is showing green, and our protocol, which is showing orange. And from this graph, it shows a saving over space overhead, dramatically, in this way. And the remark is that here we evaluate the space overhead to be the number of logical qubits per physical qubit for each code block. Okay. And we also compare the threshold of our protocol with the surface code. So basically, the threshold of our protocol is determined by the threshold of the underlying code, which is the C4C6 code. And for our numerical calculation, under the circuit level noise, evaluating the logical C0 error rate, we obtain the threshold of our protocol to be 2.4%, while the surface code will achieve 0.3%. So in this sense, we constructed a higher threshold and a lower space overhead protocol than the surface code. And one remark here is that our protocol requires O2 connectivity in its construction. And so we consider that this kind of protocol is suitable for neutral atoms or ion traps or optics, which allows long-range interactions. Okay. And we also optimize the underlying code for each physical error rate, because in reality we have various settings of the experimental settings, so we need to optimize for each settings. So the general principle of our code construction is like this. So if you have this physical error rate, we first use the underlying code to suppress the logical error rate to a certain value, which we call just a p target, which should be below the threshold of the concatenated Hamming code. So we consider the space overhead required to achieve the this logical error rate p target for various codes shown like this. And we compared for each physical error rate, for different value of the physical error rate. And as you see from these tables, the optimal code you can use for different physical error rate can be different code. So by changing underlying code, we can optimize the space overhead for each physical error rate in this way. Okay, so let me quickly show the detail of the protocol, which is optimized to achieve this, optimized to reduce the space overhead. So so basically, when in fault-tolerant quantum computation, you need to implement the fault-tolerant gate operation. And this kind of gate operation is implemented by combining gate gadget with error correction gadget. And as an error correction gadget, we use a news error correction gadget, which is basically based on the teleportation. And this left figure shows a conventional protocol which uses the auxiliary qubit in parallel like this. And we also utilize the optimized circuit of the new gadget, which uses this auxiliary qubit in sequence. The good point of the conventional protocol is that since it's it's in parallel, it has less errors. So we use this conventional protocol to the underlying code, while we also need to have a protocol with fewer qubits on the higher level. So we use this modified circuit for the higher level concatenated Hamming code. And we also use a similar strategy for the initial state preparation as well. So, but a basic principle is the same. Okay. And for the decoder, we just use a very basic decoder, which is called a hard decision decoder. So since it's a concatenated code, we can concatenate level by level basically. So if you get the measurement outcome, we first decode this measurement outcome as an underlying code, which is a fault-tolerant code. And after, and then we collect the decoded qubit information, and we, decode the collected data as a 622 code, and we pass it through to the higher level code 713 code, and we decode it and so on, and we can proceed in this way to the highest level. Okay, and to evaluate the logical C0 error rate, we conducted the following circuits in a simulation. So basically, this circuit evaluates the entanglement fidelity of the logical C0 error. Logical C0 operation. And to implement this logical C0 operation, for C4C6 or Hamming code, we use a transversal C0 plus news error correction gadget, as I explained before. And for the surface code, we implement it by using the lattice surgery. And basically, the idea of the lattice surgery to implement the logical C0 is from this circuit decomposition. So like every C0 gate can be decomposed into this kind of Pauli measurement, and we can implement each Pauli measurement by lattice surgery basically. And we evaluate the logical C0 error by evaluating this identity error by memory experiment and this Pauli measurement by stability experiment. So in this way, we have a quantitative comparison of our protocol with the surface code at the same error conditions. Okay, and finally, let me have some discussions about this protocol. First of all, I will describe the difference of our protocol with the quantum LDPC code. And I think the most different part is on the modularity. So here I just show like a surface code patch. And in the typical, in the quantum LDPC code, you need to encode like a physical qubit to a logical qubit, but you need to encode to a larger, very large code at once. While in the concatenated code, since we have this kind of structure of concatenation, it has some kind of abstraction layers. So like we can first encode the physical qubit to this code, and then collecting the logical qubit, and then encode the next level and the next level and so on. So in a sense, it has a similar structure to the IC chip like this. So like it has kind of layer structure. So this might make the implementation more easy in a sense that you can just pay some finite effort to each to constructing each code. Okay, and I will explain about some future works of this work. So first of all, we evaluate the space overhead in our analysis by just evaluating the number of physical qubits per number of logical qubits in code block. And we didn't care about the auxiliary qubit in our analysis. But of course, to conduct the FTQC, you need to care about you need to use some auxiliary qubits to conduct the fault-tolerant operation. So for instance, in the news gadget, if you use the auxiliary qubit in parallel like this, you need to pay a cost of 3 factor here. So so for more practical reasons, we need to also optimize this kind of factors at once. And also, like in our analysis, we just consider the most basic error model called the depolarizing error model. But some research has shown that if you switch the error model, then sometimes results can be different. So like the good code in this error model can be a bad code in other error model. So the natural question in this position is that do we still have an advantage over the surface code, including auxiliary qubits or on other error models? And now we are investigating these questions, and we will update the archive paper soon. Okay, so let me summarize my talk. So in that work, we constructed a concatenated code by combining the C4C code having a high threshold code with a quantum Hamming code having a low space overhead. And by using this concatenation idea, we constructed a low space overhead, high threshold code, which is better than the surface code. And we have also shown that this underlying code can be optimized for each physical error rate to achieve a better space overhead in each settings. Okay. So this is the take home of this talk. Concatenated code, save qubits. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for the very nice talk. Does anyone have questions?
Hello, thank you very much for the nice talk. In the middle, you compared transversal C0 in your code with lattice surgery-based surface code C0. Is there a reason why you didn't consider transversal C0 on the surface code?
The reason why we consider lattice surgery is just it's a conventional protocol. Of course, like you can also consider the transversal C0 gate in the surface code case, but many many previous work have considered the lattice surgery as a conventional protocol. So like we somehow wanted to compare our protocol with the conventional one. So that's why we took the lattice surgery.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Then I have one. I really like how this work was, exploiting taking advantage of the diversity of the different codes that exist. Are there any disadvantage to concatenating them? For example, in terms of, you briefly mentioned that in terms of connectivity, it seems that it's natural, but are there disadvantage?
Well, yes. So as far as I know, so basically the connectivity is main disadvantage of a protocol, and for instance, like for the decoder, we can use a very simple decoder for the concatenation, so it's not a matter. So we don't, as far as I know, like we don't see a very clear disadvantage of a protocol other than the connectivity.
Okay, yeah. And for the noise model, you consider that the noise is independent for every qubit? Do you have intuition on what happens when the noise is like locally around target many close qubit?
You mean like error occurring at the locally? Like you consider
locally stochastic noise.
So okay, so it is known that our protocol can have a threshold under this kind of local stochastic noise model, but we didn't consider specific error model in our numerical simulation, so we don't know what will have changed.
Okay. Yeah. And then if there's no other question, we can thank our speaker again.
Thank you very much.
Is the next speaker already here? Yeah, well, we still have 5 minutes. Has anyone seen the next speaker? No. Yeah, then maybe Shin Ho, you can.
Hey everybody.
Tolerance of stabilizer circuits.
It's really nice to be able to present this work at TQC this year. I am glad that I was able to make it in person and two co-authors, Shilin Huang, who is now at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and hey everybody. It's really nice to be able to present this work at TQC this year. I am sad that I wasn't able to make it in person and that neither were my two co-authors. Is now at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and Vadym Kliuchnikov, who is at Microsoft Quantum. This is work that I did while I was also at Microsoft, and where Shilin at the time was an intern, and now I'm at IBM. A major goal of quantum error correction these days is to be able to design provably fault-tolerant gates in a variety of settings. And so what I mean by that is we might have some hardware that we're allowed to apply operations to, and the operations could be faulty, they might go wrong. So for example, this is an illustration of a circuit where each wire in this circuit represents a physical qubit, and then each of the little components represents some physical operation that you can perform on your hardware qubits. And the overall effect of this circuit should be to implement some specific.
This is way too quiet, right? No one can hear this, or you can hear this. Put up your hand if you can hear it. It's too quiet. Okay. We're not really sure how to turn it up. So on the thing, everything's already on max volume. So maybe there's like some other. Max is here. Max, do you know how to turn the volume up? Put a mic. Yeah, as long as it doesn't make some crazy feedback loop, that's fine. Right? Where's the speaker? Here. Maybe like one of the lapel ones. Or I could just like stand there and hold it. Hold on. Let's try that.
Logical operation on information which is encoded, say, the quantum error correcting code. And moreover, we want it to be the case that if something goes wrong on the
I don't think it works.
hardware, or some small number of things go wrong, that the overall effect.
Like the volume everywhere is max. Yeah, we can see. Yeah, I think there must be. I think we're bringing in more and more tech support people to find out how to turn the volume up. Sorry? Well, yeah. Okay. I guess the sound is going to be here. If we take that. player also is max. Yeah.
Hey everybody, it's really nice to be able to present this work at TQC this year. I am sad that I wasn't able to make it in person, and that either the two co-authors, Shilin Huang, who
Let's see if that's the program. Yeah.
Makes the informal statement that hard to distinguish random. You might formally know this as like a generalization of the no-free-lunch theorem and things like. Throughout this conference by Tomoyuki and others, which is a quantum state that looks are random circuit, but is easy to produce. So therefore, it's actually very far from being hard random, but cannot be distinguished from it. And the no-free lunch theorem naturally holds for this. It's not too hard to prove. And
This is work that I did while
Okay, so unfortunately, we're not going to have time to do this talk because we couldn't fix the audio issues. So it'll be online with all the other talk recordings, so you can watch it online with your own speakers, which have volume controls that you understand. And then I guess we can just go straight to the next talk. Oh, okay. So we'll wait for the right time for the next talk because maybe people want to come. So I guess you can like go and get some coffee for 10 minutes or something and come back at past. Sorry about this. If you want, I guess so.
Hey everybody, it's really nice to be able to present this work at TQC this year. I am glad that I was able to make it in person and that two co-authors, Shilin Huang, who comes from technology, and Kliuchnikov, who is at Microsoft London. This is work that I did while I was also at Microsoft and now I'm at IT. The major goal of quantum error correction these days is to be able to design provably fault-tolerant gates in a variety of settings. What I mean by that is we might have some hardware that we're allowed to apply operations to, and the operations could be faulty, they might go wrong. So for example, this is an illustration of a circuit where each wire in this circuit represents a physical qubit, and then each of the little components represents some physical operation that you can perform on your hardware qubits. And the overall effect of this circuit should be to implement some specific logical operation on information which is encoded, say in some quantum error correcting code. And moreover, it would be the case that hardware or some small number of things go wrong, that the overall effect is the same, it's robust on the logical encoded information. And we would like to be able to build a quantum computer, we'd like to be able to have some complete set of logical gates where for each of these, we have some specified circuit written in terms of hardware operations that we can apply to implement an arbitrary computation robustly. And of course, these circuits are very complicated, these hardware circuits, so we would like to have some theoretical and ultimately computational tools to be able to analyze them. Specifically, we'd like to be able to verify that a hardware circuit indeed fault-tolerantly implements the desired logical gate. We'd also like to be able to have some theoretical tool to approach to prove that if we have two hardware circuits, which are fault-tolerant and implement some known logical operations, that when we plug them together, the overall circuit that they produce also is fault-tolerant and implements the composition of the logical operations of each. We would, moreover, like to be able to modify a hardware circuit if it doesn't achieve this goal. So find some problems with it and be able to modify it, and we would like some tools to help us do that. In this work, we provide a theoretical tool to address each of these circuit design goals, and we illustrate their use with an example. So more specifically, for the class of stabilizer circuits, we provide a formalism to define fault tolerance for logical operations. This formalism leverages known literature on space-time circuits, space-time codes, sorry. We introduce a time-local composition property such that if this property is exhibited by a set of circuits, then when we compose them together, the overall circuit inherits the fault tolerance properties of circuits that we are composing together. We also, with the goal of taking a circuit that isn't quite fault tolerant or doesn't correct for as many faults as we would like, we formalize and generalize the notion of hook error, which is essentially a fault which can cause outsized problems for a quantum error correction circuit. And we also introduce algorithms to find these hook errors in specific circuits. Our example is a logical implementation of the Hadamard for the surface code, and this is quite similar to a recent, another recent proposal by Riverlink. We focus on the class of stabilizer circuits, which is a rich class, but these circuits involve the preparation in Pauli basis states such as 0 or plus, Clifford unitary gates, Pauli measurements, which can output, which will output a bit of information represented by the double line. We also allow multi-qubit Pauli measurements such as ZZ, and we allow for classically controlled gates, which are controlled on the outputs of previous measurements. In this work, we're interested in stabilizer circuits, which actually form what we call stabilizer channels, which means that they have the property that if the input state is in the code space of some stabilizer code with stabilizer group S in, then there's a guarantee that the output of the state coming out of the stabilizer circuit will be in the code space of some other stabilizer code with stabilizer group S out, as shown here. And this is actually a very interesting and useful class of circuits, and it covers a lot of what we're interested in, fault-tolerant quantum error correction. In particular, it covers essentially fault-tolerant quantum error correction and stabilizer operations of all stabilizer codes and stabilizer code-based constructions, including topological stabilizer codes such as the surface code and color codes, but also much more general codes, LDPC codes, concatenated schemes, etc. And it also includes codes that change over time, such as the Clock A codes or space-time codes. While it's broad as described, it doesn't include everything, and in particular, it does not account for circuits that have non-Clifford operations in them. So for example, a magic state factory would not be included by this formalism. We couldn't analyze the fault-tolerant properties of the magic state factory itself. However, it does still plug into this formalism in the sense that if you had some magic state distillation factory and you could guarantee that you produced encoded magic states with a certain property in the input code, then you can input that state, and indeed any arbitrary state, to a stabilizer channel analyzed in this way, and all of the analysis and guarantees that you get for the stabilizer circuits would carry for the overall including the non-Clifford parts. So I wanted to kind of give some brief intuition about what faults look like in stabilizer channels. The idea is that we have some, for some given circuit, like the example circuit sketched here, we have some specific finite set of allowed faults that can occur, and these include, for example, Pauli operators of individual qubits or multi-qubit Pauli operators, and also outcome clips of measurements that occur in the circuit. And you can follow through the effect of such a fault through the circuit. For example, this flip that I showed here flips the outcome and therefore flips the control of the classically controlled NOT gate that follows, and that the effect of that fault then propagates through the circuit and can change other measurement outcomes, leave some residual Pauli operator at the end of the circuit. And the idea then is that the circuit will contain some set of detectors, also known as checks, also known as stabilizers, and there's lots of different names. This is work that has been covered in spacetime codes and detector formalism, et cetera, So there's lots of ways to think about these things, but all of them amount to the same basic idea, is that there is some check matrix for the circuit where each column in the check matrix corresponds to one of the faults that can occur, and the detectors, whatever it is that is able to detect the faults that occur in the circuit, and therefore corresponds to the rows. And so a specific fault is just a one column where there are ones for each of the detectors that will flag whenever that fault occurs. And to calculate the syndrome, the observed consequences of any set of faults, we can just use this equation here, where the fault vector codes the faults that the set of faults that occur. Similarly, I won't go into details, but similarly, there's some logical effect matrix which tracks the logical action of each fault So here again, columns correspond to faults that can occur. Just if we briefly check the channel check matrix, but rows now correspond to logical bits that can be flipped by faults. And a logical fault configuration F is a particular fault vector, which has the property that it has no syndrome. So H acting on the fault vector gives 0, but it does have some logical L, something that's not 0. And then an important quantity is the fault distance for a particular stabilizer circuit, which is just the Hamming weight of the smallest Hamming weight of a fault which satisfies. And that's important or useful because the fault distance tells us the error correction power of the circuit. In particular, we can use a minimum weight decoder to correct up to half of the fault. At this point, let's take a brief aside to describe an algorithm which is useful in this context and that will turn out to be important for us later. So suppose we have a black box algorithm for finding the fault distance of some stabilizer channel. So that means that given the check matrix H and the logical action matrix L, we can compute the distance D. So there are cases when this can be done efficiently. For example, if H is the adjacency matrix of some graph, so the graph that I've shown a part of over here, then in this case, the minimum weight vector, fault vector F, such that H acting on it gives 0 and L acting on it is non-zero, is some cycle in the graph. And the reason for that is just because the vertices of the adjacency matrix correspond to nodes, the edges correspond to faults, and in a cycle, each node is touching 2 faults and therefore has a satisfied SID node because it's touching an even number. So what we would like to know, and we'd like to use such a black box algorithm. It could be a graph-based algorithm as I've described above, but maybe H doesn't correspond to the graph in general. But I would like to ask the following question. Suppose we have some edge or set of edges, like the pair of edges shown here, and we want to know, is this a part of some minimum weight configuration? So is it part of some minimum weight logical operator? And we drew this other
Hi, so I'm very sorry for the technical issues during the last talk. Hopefully you could get a teaser of what about the subject of the talk. It will be available online. Yes, and because some people are taking the bus right after this talk, we will continue with the last talk of the week. So Shin Ho Choe will be talking about how to fault-tolerantly realize any quantum circuit with local operation.
Thank you for introduction, and thank you for coming to one of the last talks of this conference. Today, I want to show our result on realizing any quantum circuits with, in local gates. I'm going to use similar terminologies from the last talk. So the number of qubits in the quantum circuit will be called width or space. And the number of layers of the circuits would be called depth. And here, I'm assuming I can reuse the qubits which is measured. And it doesn't really increase the width. And I'm considering noise model, which is called local stochastic or locally decaying noise, which is simply putting Pauli errors between every layers, and the probability that a subset of qubits is included in the support of the Pauli should be exponentially decaying in the size of the subset. And the parameter here, P, is called noise rate or noise strength. And one of the important theorem in fault-tolerant quantum computing is, I think, this threshold theorem, which is the following. So given any quantum circuit Q, you want to construct a fault-tolerant quantum circuit Q prime, in the sense that given any target accuracy epsilon, your output circuit Q prime with noise with strength below a threshold should be epsilon close to your input circuit in terms of the total variation of the output string. And in this setup, you can ask questions like space overhead or depth or time overhead, which is the ratio of input and output circuits. And you and there are some known fault-tolerant quantum computation scheme, which was also introduced in the previous talk. I listed some of them, and you can see the table of space overhead and depth overhead. And I didn't notice that recently there was improvement with the quantum LDPC code with concentrate. It was mentioned in the last talk that depth overhead has decreased to polylog by Tamiya and other people. In this talk, I also care about locality of the quantum circuits. So simply, locality means like you put your qubits in 1D or 2D or 3D lattices, and all the 2-qubit gates are acting on local pairs of qubits. Then you can consider fault-tolerant scheme, which takes input circuit and outputs local fault-tolerant circuit. And you can think about how to construct these schemes based on fault-tolerant quantum computation scheme. So for example, you can think about swap gates to simulate long-range gate between far pair of qubits, or you can think about generating EPR pairs between those far qubits, and then try to gate teleport or qubit teleport to simulate long-range gates. So yesterday there were 2 nice talks by Chris and Noah. So in this hierarchical memory paper, they consider swap gates, and the paper by Noah and other people, they constructed bell pair to do gate teleportation. And our work also generate bell pairs. But our scheme can be applied even for quantum computing, not only for syndrome extraction. And you can also talk about overheads. And as we discussed yesterday, there is for good quantum LDPC code or concentrate LDPC codes, there is a trade-off relationship between space overhead and depth overhead. So if you minimize one of the overhead, then you certainly has to have a certain amount of the other overhead. So yesterday's talk tried to minimize the space overhead. Compared to those works, in our work, we try to minimize the depth overhead while increasing the space overhead. And we can also talk about the dimension. And yesterday's talks were talking about 2D architecture, while we constructed quasi-2D, meaning we stack up logarithmically many planar sheets. And we also came up with a 3D architecture. So our contribution is the following. So we constructed fault-tolerant routing scheme in quasi-2D and 3D lattices. And the idea is you can choose any fault-tolerant quantum computing scheme, and you can combine it with our routing scheme to construct local fault-tolerant quantum computation scheme. Let me briefly talk about routing. So routing is nothing but given one layer of the circuits. For example, here, red gate is applied to qubit 1 and qubit 6, and blue gate is applied to qubit 3 and qubit 14. And I colored qubits so that colors indicate the gate that I want to apply in this 2D lattice. For long-range gates, if I have EPR pairs connecting those two qubits, then I can just teleport qubits, or instead using gate teleportation to simulate each layer of the circuit. And then you can simply repeat this for the entire layer of the input circuit. More in detail, we can say in this way. So given Q prime, you construct Q prime local with the following properties. If your Q prime local is under local stochastic noise with strength below some threshold, then that circuit is equivalent to noisy implementation, some noisy implementation of the input quantum circuit Q prime. And here, the noise would be here C times Q2C, which is worse than Q. But here, it can be written as polynomial in Q. And we obtain the following overheads for depth and space. So for this routing, our depth overhead is constant, while our space overhead is the following polynomial. So it is n prime times some polylog term in quasi 2D lattice. And for 3D lattice, we had square root of n prime times some polylog. Yeah, as I said, we combine this with some existing fault-tolerant quantum computing scheme. so that given input circuit Q, in the end, we come up with Q prime local, which is local circuit. Combining these two, we get another threshold theorem for local fault-tolerant quantum computation scheme. For computing overheads for the entire local fault-tolerant quantum computing scheme, you can simply multiply the overhead of the given fault-tolerant scheme and our routing scheme. That's a very elementary calculation. And let me talk about more details about routings. Our routing is nothing. For routing, let's first consider non-fault-tolerant version. Then simply you can think about entanglement swapping. So here you start with all zero state. And for each neighborhood in this 1D chain, you apply entangling gates. And you take Bell measurement, which can also be written as entangling gates and single qubit measurement. And then after that, you take parity function on the output, measurement output. And according to the parity, you apply some Pauli correction. So you can end up with a desired Bell basis. And the idea of 3D routing in 3D lattice is the following. So, so you fill up your lattice with auxiliary qubits. And then using a greedy algorithm, you find edge disjoint path in the lattice. And then you can run parallelly the entanglement swapping to generate EPR pairs simultaneously. And since entanglement swapping was constant depth, and you can parallelize it because all path was edge disjoint. So the overall depth overhead should be constant. And we showed that with simple greedy algorithm, you can pack all of the paths in L by L by 4L lattice, where L is scaling as square root of n prime. And we noticed that this kind of routing was extensively studied in many lattice surgery literatures with many optimization techniques. But in our paper, for the proof of threshold theorem, we only use a very simple greedy algorithm for our purpose. And what about the fault-tolerant routing? So basic idea is we take the idea from measurement-based quantum computing, and there they first create a very big graph state, and then they measure all the qubits except for 2 qubits, which are taking the corners of this cluster. And then according to the measurement result, you again compute some Pauli correction and apply to one of the remaining qubits. And then it will give you an EPR pair. And surprisingly, this procedure is also noise resilient with constant threshold. And we extended this result by showing that it also works even if you have multiple multiple cluster states. We proved that it works with local stochastic noise, which allows some amount of correlations. And here we emphasize that this theorem doesn't really depend on K, which is the number of clusters. So that's why we can use this theorem for our parallel routing. And simply, we just replace all the path with our clusters or bus. But we have to thicken a little bit because the cluster has to have linear size with cross-section scaling in log R, where log R is the range of the entanglement. And then you can pack your buses into the lattice, and that will be your final routing scheme. As a conclusion, we are proposing a scheme for realizing fault-tolerant local circuit based on fault-tolerant quantum computation scheme without considering locality. And we rigorously prove threshold theorem for circuit level noise. And for that proof, we came up with a parallel repetition theorem for generating Bell pairs And for discussion, so we can talk about optimality of optimality of space and depth overheads. And I'm afraid our space overhead is too big because now space is more valuable compared to time, I think, because qubit is very expensive. But I hope in the future that qubit became so cheap so that people care more about depth of the computation. Thank you.
So I'll ask one. You're saying the polynomial overhead is too big, and you also say it's optimal.
Oh yeah, but yeah. What's your question? Sorry.
What do you think we can do about it?
Like in old literatures, talking about concatenated codes, or even in the paper by Aharonov and Benor, which proves the threshold theorem for the first time, they mention how those can be localized, and they have very small, like only polylogarithmic overhead for local architecture. But here, what I'm saying is for localizing LDPC code, there's trade-off. You cannot minimize space and time simultaneously. So it's a bit like for computation, maybe time is important, but in the previous talks, they were talking about syndrome extraction circuits. And if you can prove syndrome extraction circuit with local gates as threshold, even if they have long depth, then it's fine. You can just construct it and say you need to wait a little bit to obtain all the syndromes, but if it works, it's fine. So yeah, my point is for memory, I think increasing depth is fine, but maybe for computation, it is not very good, then you can try to minimize the depth, but then you have space overhead.
I see, thanks.
Okay, I have a related question.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's say like I can make as many physical qubits as I want for free. Like I don't care about the space cost at all. And then I'm going to compare, like, say, doing what you do. So I have some like non-embeddable, but like in 2D, like some finite rate LDPC code, and then I'm using this big third dimension to make it all local, right? And then I want to compare this to just doing like surface code computation, and I can use my whole 3D architecture, so I can stack them all up in 3D, and I can do like transversal CNOT gates between them and things like this. What kind of regimes do you think we have to go to before your approach, like using like non-local codes and making them local, would outcompete just using this 3D architecture to do surface code computation?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question we have to think about. Like, but my thinking is like, for surface code, many people try to really optimize the overheads, but for LDPC codes, maybe we still have some room. So I cannot really say a concrete answer to your question, but yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question. So like in your construction, is there any possibility to reduce the space overhead more by increasing the time overhead? Like for instance, sequentially using some qubits. Do you think polynomial space overhead is inevitable in your approach, or can you still decrease the space overhead a bit and then you can increase the time overhead?
So yeah, so the yesterday's talks were like minimizing space but increase depth. Our was the other way.
Mm-hmm.
And you can think about somewhere in the middle,
right.
Like you want to afford more qubits maybe, then maybe, yeah, like, but there's no paper yet, like about this intermediate regime.
Okay,
but
so
I
don't
think
know whether,
you can think about it, yeah.
So you don't know whether there exists some threshold theorem kind of thing in this kind of
I think I can use the same technique. So I was thinking about that by shrinking the height actually, but then you have to make sure that for waiting time using the bus, you have to protect somehow your qubits. So this, I think, similar to hierarchical code, you need extra like surface code, or like your concatenated code, like you need some base or underlying code maybe to protect this additional noise caused by waiting for bus.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the very nice talk. And I have questions like, I think Gaussman has a paper maybe in 1999 about like using local gates to fault-tolerant quantum computing. So can you remind me like what is the difference between your work between the previous work?
So in that paper, he suggested using swap gates, and it was sufficient for him to minimize the sequence of swap gates, and it doesn't really blow up like our case. So we remained. So we were in the regime of small depth overhead but large space overhead. But in this old paper, he could show with concatenation, space overhead and depth overhead can be both small as polylog.
Okay, I see. So can I understand your work like you introduce more space overhead and you can get actually a higher threshold for this fault-tolerant computation?
I'm not sure if I understand your thing correctly, but that technique in Gottesman's work that cannot be applied to LDPC code. You certainly need certain amount of swap gates for concentrate good LDPC code because of the expansion property. So either you have to spend more qubits or spend more depth to simulate local gates.
Oh, okay, I think I understand. Thanks.
And then thank you for the very nice talk. And let's thank our speaker again. And this brings us to the end of the last session. Yeah, there will be some closing remarks in maybe 5 minutes.
So lunch is waiting, so I think we can just wrap up this conference. And thank you very much coming here for TQC 2024. I hope you enjoy also scientifically and culturally and otherwise whatever experienced here. And also I have a few comments on this occasion. In the first is I believe it is very important for scientific community to stay together and discussing scientific problems. The world is getting a little bit shaky, but I believe the scientists are open-minded and we can sort of discuss scientific problem openly. And I think conference like this is very important. The second is I hope you enjoy this, well, including rain. Unfortunately, last week was quite good weather, but this week was quite rainy. But I hope you enjoy that climate. And I don't know if you had a time to go to the sea, but that's actually ocean is one of the richest environment on the earth. And it's really amazing. I'm not really a swimmer, but it's really amazing to go into there. So if you're keen to come again to OIST, you're always welcome. And we have visiting programs, summer schools, conferences, and also new academic positions opening, we hope, next year. So if you're interested in OIST, please stay in tune to OIST. And also the typhoon might be coming, but hopefully it seems now it's going between Okinawa and the mainland island. So we probably will be okay, but please be careful and get information before you travel. And I hope you all safely go back to home. Thank you very much.